Good afternoon, everyone. I say good afternoon because I'm in Barcelona, although I do know that some of you and some of our speakers today are in the US, Paris, and other places in the world. So welcome everybody, wherever you are. We start this session. We will be talking about love today. It's a very common topic for all, and we can say so. I hope that is the case. So, we have 5 speeches, but before we hear from everybody, I would like to hear from Alfonso Sánchez Moya. He is the member of the board of La Caixa Foundation Fellows Association. He is a linguist with a PhD by the Complutense University. And after going through Harvard, he's now working with Alexa in data linguistics. So, Alfonso, you have the floor. Good afternoon, Sylvia. Good morning. I am Alfonso Sánchez Moya. I am spokesperson for the Board of La Caixa Foundation Fellows Association, and I would like to represent the entire foundation and welcome you to the Becari's Knowledge Day program. As Sylvia was saying, we are very happy to have people who are experts in their own fields to try and go into the passionate world of love. I believe that we do not exaggerate and say that love is one of the drivers of our existence. It actually is a central element in many processes, social relationships that mark our lives through many different representations. Mother's love, father's love for our pets, love for our professions, endless types of love. And despite all that, what else can we know about love? How do we define it? There's been many different approaches during our existence. I spoke to a close friend the other day, and she told me a quote by Mario Denetti talking about love and comparing it with an artichoke. Despite all this, how can we and what else can we know about love from biology, history, music, philosophy? So that's why we're here today. We're going to start trying to understand a bit better if we love from the heart, from the brain, or from a combination of both. We will do this with Marcé Balcells Camps. She's main researcher at the MIT and professor of bioengineering in the Chemical Institute in Sarriá in Barcelona, co-founder and vice director in the MIT program in Spain. So after that, we will go to a playlist of royal weddings. We will go into marriage, love, and opera in the Baroque. We will hear Clara Viloria Hernandez. She's a musicologist specialized in the 17th century music and a violin player. She's in Paris, but she's doing her PhD at Harvard University. Then we will provide additional perspectives. We will talk about love from biology. We will have Dr. Enrique Lanuza Navarro, professor of biology in the University of Barcelona, and also holds a PhD by the New York University. He focuses on the neural circuits that make up innate behaviors, such as sexual attraction, for instance. Then we will go to love towards our professions. So we have Laia Puig to talk about this. She plays the violoncello in Graz, Basilea, and Berlin. She has had many awards in her career, and she now combines her teaching with performance as well. And finally, we will go into the philosophical perspectives of love. We will focus in a value. What is the value of love? We will do so with Saray Ayala Lopez, specializing in aspects such as metaphysics of sexual orientation. And she's assistant professor in the California State University in Sacramento. So I won't go on for longer. From the association and from the board, we really hope you can enjoy this multidisciplinary approach of love in its many dimensions. Sylvia, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Alfonso. I think I need to clarify something. I am very pleased to be uh, surrounded by fellows of La Caixa Foundation. I am a physics but communication has been my second profession, and I am very happy to be here with you. I've worked with fellows before, and it's always a pleasure. So, who is watching? We have people from all around the world, but people are members of the association as well, some fellows in the association, but this is an event open to other people who are listening in, who are not fellows, but we also want to welcome you. So before we move on to Merce, I would like to explain how this works. There's 5 speeches of around 8 minutes. The people will speak for 8 minutes, and then we have a couple of minutes for questions. So those who registered could already ask some questions, and you can also ask them now through the chat of the streaming. So I encourage you to do so. We will try to choose one or two. And the idea is for you to listen very smoothly to the 5 people we have here today. We spoke about love being in the air, and the truth is that love is everywhere, as we'll hear today. I'm very curious to see how this goes. Mercedes is in the US at the MIT. She's also a researcher in Barcelona in the Chemical Institute in Sarria, and she asks this question: is it, do we love with our heart, with our brain, or both? And as Alfonso said, she is an engineer expert in tissue engineering. So, Merce, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Silvia and Alfonso. And thank you to La Caixa. I always say that I am who I am thanks to my parents who gave birth to me and thanks to the education I received, but essentially thanks to La Caixa, I wouldn't have been able to perform my PhD in Germany. And without that step, I wouldn't have reached the heaven of science, which is the MIT. So thanks for this opportunity. I always start my speeches talking about myself because I don't like the CVs that you write about me anyways. So in order to know me or about me more personally, yes, I am from Barcelona with this beautiful architecture that marked my life because that scaffolding in La Sagrada Familia, I see them differently here. I decided to do science and chemistry because of a teacher I had in 7th grade in primary school, Matius Cariz, who told me we were very bored in the classroom studying the elements table, the periodic table of elements. And she said that those elements were the only known ones, that was just the tip of the iceberg, and that everything that was under that was still unknown. And that day, with that sentence, I became a researcher. And the third thing I want you to know about me is that I'm part of big family. I'm the eldest, and we always went to visit my grandmother, and I did some clinical research in her garden. Please don't do that yourselves. But my mom was always surprised that all my younger siblings had diarrhea except for me. I did all these magic mixtures of plants from my grandmother's flower, and I fed them to my siblings. The good thing is that there's no deadly plants in her garden, so that's good news. When, as Silvia said, people ask me what I do, I say that I do tissue engineering, and many people believe I work for Inditex, for Zara. It's not that type of tissue or fabric. In fact, one of my sisters, my sister Maria, works for Zara, and she always dresses me up very elegantly whenever I teach in English. When I say tissue engineering, people believe I do tissue paper. That's very important. I don't know whether you know in Spain, but there was no tissue anywhere all around the country. But the tissue engineering I do is that I'm in a lab and we use human cells in the lab of all sorts. We also use different types of materials that act as scaffolding, and those cells can adhere to this scaffold and create own tissue. And we study how those mechanical impulses that our organs have in our body, we simulate them in the lab so that we grow tissue and organs so as to relieve the list of transplants in the future, but now in order to simulate disease. So when those organs and tissues are affected by malignant um, elements such as COVID, for instance, one of the most we are concerned about is heart and brain. So when Lakasha asked me if I wanted to participate, I said yes, precisely. I work on that, preparing heart and brains. And in order to understand how mental disease and chronic disease, cardiovascular disease, for instance, is interconnected, that is why I entitled my speech with that question: do you love with your heart, your brain, or both? And in order to answer this, the first thing we have to do is to study brains and hearts. So we use images of patients at the lab to do a computational drawing that allows us to see how the flow of arteries, for instance, that irrigate the hearts. There are some areas, as you can see here, there's stagnation areas or areas where blood flows better. We use different techniques, but for instance, 3D printing to do artificial veins and arteries. This is scale 1:1, as you can see. And even in the case of coronary arteries, they grab the hearts in angle. This is just the polymer, the scaffolding, in order to have a proper heart and some arteries that can provide life. What we do is we plant those tubes with all the different layers and cells that would make up an artery. So fibroblasts, smooth muscle cells, endothelial cells, and something that finally resembles an artery. You can see it here very nicely in red. And additionally, we have very good colleagues doing engineering, electrical engineering, and they create these devices here in the lower part to the right. And this means that we can subject arteries to mechanic impulses. Here you have a pump, and basically it acts as a heart so that that blood can circulate through veins and arteries as if in our own body. So these devices allow us to imitate things that we couldn't imitate. It is complicated for me to open you up and study your heart, but we have this in the lab. And regarding the brain, it's something similar. We use bio-inspired material, and what we do here is we use cells of the brain. In this case, we also use endothelial cells, as you can see here. So this is a microscopic image, and you have the green part, which is the endothelium, where the blood flows, and the red are the astrocytes that are in the brain. And for you to see more results here, you see the material, we can modulate it, we can provide different types of porous. The porous and the type of protein it is made up with provides different consistency. There's a more rigid one, and this is too soft, but this is more rigid. And we also provide mechanical impulses because there's also blood in the brain, of course. So we can observe here down below in green, these are the cells, for instance, when there's no flow. There's a micro stroke, for instance, there. So they have a shape like a puzzle. And if you provide proper healthy flow, they become aligned, as you can see in B and C, in the direction of the flow, and they're healthy. But if you provide very high flow or hypertension, then they go back to being blurry. You can't see the lines in C here because they've disappeared. They have lost their limit. These cells should be protecting the brain and creating a barrier, which is called the blood brain barrier. Well, it's all blood, so that brain is at risk of suffering an infection, for instance. Everything that I have explained very quickly, obviously, I'm not working on it myself. We do it with a multidisciplinary collaboration where we have my team dealing with tensors, biomarkers. We have a very good team in Miami. They're the clinical psychologists that measure or study the clinical side of things, of mental health and artificial intelligence as well. Very important with Mexico City and the Computational Center with Barcelona, as well as Silvia said before, at the IQS, but also with the Open University of Catalonia and Santiago del Hospital and the Cardiology Department in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So this would not be possible without international programs. One of them, for instance, is MIT Spain. and La Caixa help always and also support that. And as you can see, the cities, apart from being beautiful, the language that we all speak, well, I tried to speak English during my childhood, and now I spent most of my time speaking Spanish, ironically. So the question I started with, and then I'm leaving here, was precisely this one: do you love with your heart or your brain or both? Well, we have created some tissue models that allow us to study interactions between tissue and organs and study their correlation and look at comorbidities. So if you have a mental disease, how could that affect to cardiovascular disease and the other way around? I would also like to tell you that we need to break up the silos. We need to collaborate with disciplines in many countries. And well, lingua franca in science and technology continues to be English, but for a medical and educational impact, it is no longer the case. So as I told you, I'm not working alone. These are all my collaborators, fabulous students of all these universities, and the support of many people that make this possible. And here is when I stop my 8 minutes. Thank you very much, Merce. Yes, you were absolutely on time. Thank you so much. And we have some time for a question asked by the people who registered. Why do people fall in love with other people who are similar to them? Is there anything in the tissues that can give us an answer, perhaps? Well, I haven't thought about that. In truth, it is a good question. The tissues that we use cells from many donors. They're not isolated. So far, we are not personalizing them. I cannot tell you that we have compared patient A to patient B. They're all combined. And there's a lot of heterogeneity. You can see this in cells. I see that they're very heterogeneous. So some that are similar, well, no, at a cell basis, we are all very similar when you look at the microscopic image. Depending on the power, you can see many cells with or surfaces with a lot of relief, and some is flat. And similar thing here, I would say that we are not that similar from the cell standpoint. Thank you very much. And you could wonder what being similar or what to look alike it means. It depends on our lives. It means a different thing. Thank you very much, Merce. I have another question, and I think we have 1 minute left. Let's go on to it. What do you think, if you had to provide an answer with your experience, do we speak more with our heart or with our brain? Do you dare answer this question? Well, it depends on the age. It depends on the age, I would say. It depends on the moment in life, and it depends on the age. That's what I believe. What I see, once again, and I'm speaking as a person, is that young people love more with the heart, and then we become more rational. In cells also age, and they respond differently to different stimuli. And what I study more is fluid dynamics, although there's electric connection as well, but I see that more mechanical. So I would say the heart, but the aged ones, the aged cells, it's more electric impulses. It depends on the time, I would say. Oh, that's good. Well done. Very interesting response. Thank you very much once again, Merce. And let's continue with our next speaker. We're now going to talk about royal weddings. It's a good time to do so. We will speak to Clara Viloria. Hello, Clara. Clara plays the violin. She's a musicologist, and she proposes to discover the playlist of this typical royal wedding in 1660, when um, Maria Teresa of Austria and Louis XIV were getting married. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to La Caixa Foundation. So let's get into it. If we talk about love, it seems unavoidable to speak about marriage. However, this was not necessarily the case in royal weddings. And in the 17th century, many of you might know this, royal marriages back then and before that and after that were a political tool in order to achieve alliances to strengthen dynasties, and many wars are basically solved with a marriage agreement. So the young princesses are forced to leave their country and play almost a diplomatic role, which has been allocated to them from birth. How is this interesting from the standpoint of history of music? Well, this generates a huge impact in culture. On the one hand, because the fact that a princess moves, it is not an isolated effect. There's a huge number of people traveling with her, moving to a different country. That is artists, servants who consume and communicate the culture. And this allows to create um, in the court, in the royal courts, a huge center of culture. And then on the other hand, because these events that are so important at a European scale or even globally, they're associated to huge theater productions and almost always hand in hand with opera. Opera is born at the beginning of the 17th century, around the 1600s, and some of the examples we know of a proto-opera are precisely devoted to the marriage between Maria de' Medici and Louis XIV of France. So there is a deployment mediums for this. For each one of these marriages are an excuse to strengthen and to deploy all the possible resources they have. So fireworks, music, which becomes more and more improved with the musicians. It is like a Coldplay concert, one of those macro concerts that we see nowadays with the five senses. And that was the case during the Baroque. 1660, well, why since 1660, as Sylvia was saying, this is the marriage between Maria Teresa of Austria and Louis XIV of France. So this year, the Peace of the Pyrenees is signed, and this entails peace after many years of wars between Spain and France. So as such, this entails a marriage between Louis XIV, young king, who was not known as the king's son king, and Maria Teresa of Austria, so a Spanish princess. How was this wedding? Well, this wedding was done by Paris, so the both of them had never actually met before, and they get married separately, and they get together in the border between Spain and France. Speaking about love, this is quite frequent, even if it's love between siblings. The princess bids farewell to her family. We apologize, but we're getting really bad noise from the speaker at the moment. We are having technical issues with your audio, Clara, for some reason. We can't hear you, Clara. Sylvia, can you please tell her? Hello. I think we are having some trouble with Clara's audio. At least those of us who are here are not receiving it properly. I don't know whether we can solve this. And if we cannot, we should move on to the next speaker. Clara, maybe you can test it out for just a second. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we can't hear you. So sadly, we were all very interested in what happened in this wedding in 1660. Clara, if you are able to solve it, please send us a message that we can go back to you after the next speech. But let's continue for everyone who is connected. So let's now talk about biology of love. In this case, we will have Enrique Lanuza here with us, connecting from Valencia. Enrique holds a PhD in biology science and works on neural circuits under innate behavior. So falling in love, for instance, feeling or loving, even if it's not towards our partner, it could be towards somebody else or our profession. Enrique, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Many thanks. Thank you to the foundation and the colleagues from the Fellow Association for organizing this Becarios Knowledge Day and for inviting me. I am very happy to be able to tell you about all this. It is 8 minutes, but I will start a bit early. 3 million years ago, when the Homo gender was developing and evolving, the one we belong to. And back then, in those years, there were two evolutive trends that created problems. One was the increase of the size of the brain, as you can see there on the image above, and the other one was the standing position. Well, with this biped um, position, bipedal position, the birth channel, our delivery channel, grew narrower, as we can see on the Bible already. But that is not general in biology. It's quite particular to our species and is basically because of these two evolution trends that continue to be here with us nowadays. So two solutions appeared from the evolution standpoint. One was being born without a full creation of our brain, so that the birth canal was not an impediment. And the other one was basically to be neonates. We are a bit useless for some time after being born. It's not like the chimpanzees that they can very quickly flee a predator or eat for themselves. But for a human baby to be able to do that, years need to go by, a few years basically. So that generated the need of taking care of babies for a newborn babies for much longer than in any other species. In order to take care of babies, it was a great advantage to have partners who could share those that caring, that attention. So that's more motherly than fatherly attention was selected in the evolution because it contributed an advantage in terms of survival of our offspring. This means that it has a genetic basis that means that those with those genes survive more, and that is why that's the majority character in the population. So somehow we have our genes of love. There's many, and we don't know everything about them all, and they're very much influenced by the aspect of culture. But we have love genes that generate neural circuits that are involved in these behaviors. These circuits, the ones that we study in neurobiology labs such as mine, and the first one that we know is more involved is this one I'm showing you here on screen, where that structure that responds to VDA, that is the ventral area, has some neurons that use the neurotransmitter that you can see to the right, which is dopamine, and send that sign to a series of structures in the brain, which are very important in the regulation of our behavior. Nucleus accumbens is a very preserved structure that mediates all the behaviors aimed at reinforcement. So whether it is drinking when we're thirsty, eating when we're hungry, or sexual intercourse for reproduction, for instance. So studies carried out in partners when they're intensely falling in love, carried out by the New Jersey research group by Helen Fisher, they show that these neurons with the neurotransmitter are particularly active during that stage when the person who is in love is shown all the images of his or her partner. But that is not the case during all the time when the partner or the couple stays together. It is essentially during the first 12 to 18 months, the intense falling in love stage. And then we move on to a different stage, more pragmatic love, which, well, we can also study in animal models, but this has been more complicated because only 3% of mammal species have this type of pragmatic love, of keeping a stable partner throughout time and during the whole life. For some species, those who helped us were these rodents, these American rodents. And these voles have these stable partners. They maintain this monogamy during practically their entire lives. And additionally, they have some cousins, the mountain voles, who are very similar in everything, except for that they do not create stable couples at all. After reproduction, the male just disappears and the female is in charge of the offspring, which is quite general in mammals. So in the brain of these animals, we have been able to study what is different and what is active when these stable couples are formed. And the answer are two neuropeptides, two small neurons made up by 9 amino acids. You know that those are the blocks that make up proteins, just 9. That's a very short protein, a peptide. And it is vasopressin and oxytocin. As you can see in the image down below, it's a dark region in the plant vole, and that is the activity induced by oxytocin and vasopressin in that part of the brain that also receives dopamine in the falling in love stage. However, in the mountain vole, as you can see, that does not happen. That was manipulated experimentally with different genetic and neural activity. And it has been shown that by manipulating the activity of these neuropeptides in the structures, we can make mountain voles monogamists and having the meadow voles not actually getting into a couple. So this is strong evidence that the neuropeptides have this key role in these animal models. There are some studies in humans as well that show the receptors of these neuropeptides with some linkage or bondage of some kind with fidelity or not, non-fidelity in human beings. Culture, of course, is extraordinarily important, but culture is built upon the biology that lies underneath. So I don't want to say that we are predetermined to have stable partners or not, depending on our neuropeptides. And I will end up with 2 observations. The fact that we can study in animal models behaviors that are similar to those of flirting, sexual intercourse, and having stable partners does not mean that these animals feel the same that we do when we are falling in love or when we have a stable partner. We don't know what they feel. We know that they have behaviors regulated by neural systems that they share with us, but we don't know how they feel. And the last observation is that understanding the biology of love doesn't make it less beautiful. Understanding light refraction does not make the rainbow less beautiful or gorgeous. So at the end of the day, studying these very relevant phenomena for us allows us to understand them better and doesn't take away any beautiful character that they may have, the relevant character and purpose they have for us as people who are aware and conscious, which is, well, something that we have and very likely animals don't. So I will leave some references here. So for those of you who are more interested, and thank you very much once again to Lakaisha, I'm very happy to answer questions if there's any. Thank you, Enrique. Yes, we do have some questions ready for you. Specifically, you spoke about this partner love or couple love, and are there any biological differences between this type of love and maybe love within a family, so between siblings or motherly and fatherly love, the one that has been studied in animals and some with functional imagery is love between fathers and mothers and sons and daughters, and it has been seen that the cells that activate do it differently. There's also a motivational role, as I was saying before, because we have a lot of well-being, motivation for the well-being of our offspring. But there is a difference in the cortical areas in prefrontal cortex called the cingulate cortex, which are different. And there are differences in terms of how we show or express these different types of love. Thank you very much, Enrique. We will have to leave you because we want to try to be on time. So let's move on to the next one. Thank you very much, Enrique. And now we'll talk to Laia Poch. We go back to music. And now we talk to Laia Poch. She plays the cello and she is a professor and lecturer in the Music Conservatory of Aragon. She is going to talk about a different type of love, not the love for a person, rather love for what one does, love for music, and how this became her profession. Laia, you have the floor. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much to Lakaisha for organizing these rich events. I am a cello player and I wanted to share my love story with the music with you. As in any love story, this started. So sorry, I do have a problem here with my screen, but it's solved. Well, everything started with a special moments for me. I started playing the cello and the piano when I was 7 years old, and 2 years later, a day came when I was listening to the radio and there was a fabulous music playing. It was the classical radio. And there was a symphony playing with lots of instruments I didn't know about. And that music truly captivated me. So I listened until the end and I didn't know who the composer back then was, but I knew it was Symphony Number 1 of some composer. And the name was Spring. And then I realized it was Schumann, which is a composer I've always been attracted to. So the truth is that at that age, I didn't really know how anything external could move me so much. I knew about basic emotions. Yes, I did know that, but that music touched me differently to everything that I had experienced. I continued studying, and after a few years, I fell in love with music. And as happens with love, when you fall in love, you don't know where everything will end or where it will take you to. So when I was a teenager, I started playing in young Spanish orchestras, first in Catalonia and then in the Spanish orchestra. And that was a very important career stage in my career, sorry, because that is when I met lots of people my age with my likes, and somehow I felt at ease and with peace because, well, I did feel like an odd nerd in my classroom with students, but the symphonic orchestra captivated me We played a great repertoire from Strauss, Mahler, Stravinsky. It was truly a time when I discovered music, and I thought it was amazing that the human mind, a person, could have been capable of composing such perfect music. And if you have the opportunity of listening Mahler Symphony live, I would really recommend you do so because it's a fantastic experience. It was a very happy time for me. And a time came when I knew I love this. The time came to commit. When you know what you like, you have to work as much as you can, and you need to try and study with the best professors, with the best centers, wherever they are. Because it is good that you like something and that you're more or less good at, but you need to study a lot and work a lot in order to reach your maximum potential. And my commitment with music was to not go to university at all and study music abroad. Basically, so when I was 19, I went to Vienna in Austria, and Vienna was far away than it is now because there was no computer, no internet, no smartphone, nothing back then. And then I did my higher studies in Switzerland, Basel, and in Berlin after with La Caixa grant. I traveled a lot. For many years, I played with many different young orchestras in Europe, and I went around the world. I played with great composers, and I was very lucky to listen to many different concerts. I discovered all sorts of music. I discovered old music, Hartmann, Kurtman in Vienna, opera, the chamber music. And for me, it was truly important to live in cities that had huge cultural offer in order to have the opportunity of going to different concerts every night, wherever it was, even if it was just standing up at the very end of the hall. So after those years, I played cello, I studied cello, I traveled a lot and listened to music a lot. And when my training ended, there was a more complicated stage because sooner or later you do get some disappointment. You don't know what to do or what path to follow. And in love and in life, you get to a point where you need to make decisions in a more aware decisions. I studied in Europe around 10 times, 10 years. I came back to Spain after that, and I felt at a loss at that time. Some fellows might relate to that. It's not always easy to go back to your country to live when you have lived abroad for years. I knew I had great training, but I was a bit of at a loss. I didn't know what to do professionally speaking. I could somehow see that I was carrying some expectations with me and that I needed to take some time to understand what I wanted to do with everything that I'd learned and to know where to move towards because within music, there's many different paths. And at that time, I listened to Bach sonatas and partitas for violin solos. In the manuscript, you can see 6 solos. Sei solo, which means to be on your own in Italian. It is some music I do recommend you listen to if you need to find yourselves. So anyway, I found my path. Gradually, I understood how to integrate this love for life love for music in my life and to make it a profession. For 15 years now, I'm teaching cello. I started with young girls and boys, and I'm at the conservatory school in Aragon. And I'm now at the center part of my career, and it's a privilege. My profession is a privilege because teaching cello is just much more than teaching someone to play an instrument. I always try to go one step beyond so that my students can learn to love music, to have criteria and sense of their own professional ethics and willing to continue learning. And I hope that education continues to be one of the pillars in my career. And the other thing I do professionally is performance. I enjoy playing a lot. I love being on stage. I love the butterflies that you feel in your stomach despite all the years. And I believe that each concert is a fabulous opportunity to communicate a message, your own message, and you can really leave a mark on someone who's never been to a concert before, or you can actually provide a moment of disconnection to a person who's listening to you. And now I am in a stage of my life where I'm especially attracted to chamber music in a smaller format and doing things from my intimacy. I no longer need the big operas or the big symphonies. And sometimes I think about what will come in the future. And I think it is good to be happy and proud of where you are, but we need to look forward and continue training and always having a humble attitude towards everything and try to be a better person, a better teacher, a better musician. To discover more music because we're very fortunate to have a huge repertoire. And I am now discovering fabulous music of female composers who have been quite hidden by their gender. And I hope that this can also provide me some space in my own path. And I would be very happy if somehow at the end of my career, I know that I've been able to plant some seeds of this love for music in younger people. Thank you very much. Well, Laia, thank you so much. I do have a very quick question for you. What would you tell a young person who has fallen in love with music and who is now finishing their higher studies and higher education in music? What would you tell them? I would tell them to study more, to study as much as possible with the best possible teachers, and to be in no rush, because everyone finds its own place at the right moment. And sometimes we are in a rush and we need to do lots of auditions and tests in order to find our own place, and it will come. The time will come. Thank you very much. Always, that's a very good tip in these days when we're all running all around the place. So we're now going to move on to the next speech. We will speak to Sarai Ayala. I would like to tell you that we will go back to Clara at the end, but we will hear from Sarai first. Sarai has studied philosophy. She has a postdoc by the Carlos III University, and now she is in the California State University teaching in Sacramento. She will be talking about what is love and what is its value. Good question to get started, or get finishing rather, in these Becari's Knowledge Day. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much to La Caixa for the opportunity given to me of not falling in the well of despair when you're working on your PhD. I didn't really know until they told me, hey, you're going to lose your friends, you're going to go into a depression. And I thought, oh, no, no, that's not going to happen to me. Of course it has. So thank you very much, La Caixa, because they brought me out of that well of despair, taking me to Vancouver. And I kept my trust in myself and self-assurance. So now I wanted to explore very briefly the value of love. And I will just present two views of love. One is a very common one, and the other one I am going to use as a contrast. This common view of love tells us that love is associated to happiness, and in a very dramatic way. If there's no love, there's no happiness. That's how it does relate. So, love is a feeling, something that happens to us, and we cannot control it. It's something that cannot be practiced. It is not good or bad. It is what it is. It's not something that we can learn how to do properly, or, well, it's just rather something that happens to us, we cannot control, and it gives us happiness or takes happiness away from us without us being able to do anything as a society and individuals. We're quite obsessed with love. If we go to the cinema or read a novel, they're all related to love as basis, and most are romantic relationships or other sorts. between siblings and friends, but love is always there. However, we don't receive education on how to love well, how to love better, or reflect on how we want to be loved and how we want to love. Because in this common view, we assume that loving and being loved is like breathing. It just happens and we cannot learn. In this common perspective, it's love is like slightly magic because it disappears and then appears once again without without us having any type of control or being able to explain it. What happens or what seems to be quite positive in love, it's quite negative actually, because in this common view of love, love is like an erratic strength that just comes, sweeps us over, and we are exposed to it. And even if its coolest moments distorts our perception of reality, because when we love and when we believe we're doing it correctly, we're very biased towards the people we love and we see it as positive. But this makes us see reality in a way it's not. Sometimes we provide qualities to people and they don't have it. And sometimes we even betray our own values in the name of love, in the name of love for our country, for our families, for ideals. We do very unpleasant things. And even in the name of love, we can hurt the people we say we love. Let's just summarize this common view of love. I've given you lots of ideas, but I believe they can summarize the common way we have of thinking about love. We see love as something personal, something passive, uncontrollable, that is radically and essentially as related to happiness. We see it as something magical that sometimes drives us away from reality, distorting the way we perceive the people we love, and as an obstacle to having a moral life. According to this view of love, the value of love is based on the fact that it provides us with happiness. So it is an egotistical value, isn't it? Because we look for love in order to fill our lacks and our shortages and in order to be happy. Let's now look at a different perspective of love. And in order to present it, I am going to use the work of several thinkers and philosophers according to this alternative view of love. Love is something active that we need to learn and practice, and whose value is not happiness. The value of love in this alternative way of thinking is its connection with knowledge and with the good. I'll start with a list of philosophers and thinkers with Diotima de Mantinea, which is a character between reality and fiction because there's no concluding evidence of her existence. But if she did exist, she did so around 400 before Christ, and they say she could be teacher of the well-known Socrates. For Diotima, love makes the lover want to understand the world, understand their lover and the world, and to do good stuff, good things. The goal and objective of love, according to this thinker, I actually believe she was a priestess. She says that there's no happiness but goodness. Iris Murdoch in the 20th century said that love brings you out of yourself, about the trap of your mind that is always busy in perceiving reality depending on what is convenient to it. And it makes you perceive reality as it is, to see people who are different to you and appreciate them based on what they are and not what you want them to be. According to this idea, love does not distort reality, but it rather reveals reality. As opposed to the common idea of love being passive, Amelie Rorty, who passed away recently, tells us that love requires this starting of philosophical research. It requests we do reflection and have critical thinking. Miss Bell Cooks, it says that love is not something passive that just happens to us. It is a series of actions that require learning and practice. We need to educate ourselves in order to love if we want to do it properly, because loving and being loved is not easy, as Hook says. What is easy is to do things wrong. For her, love is not a need or something that is unavoidable. It is rather a decision. And as such, it has its responsibilities. So if we decide to love and if we decide to be loved, we have responsibility. This way of thinking about love, this alternative way, brings it out of the personal plane. Now, love becomes a potential political tool to change society. There's a great tradition in Afro American feminism that uses this loving ourselves and loving other people beyond differences, but also acknowledging them in order to create a more fair society. There's lots of feminist philosophers who propose effective philosophy, and love and care are essential elements in a fair society. For instance, one of the things that are proposed according to this idea is that we should make sure that our job allows us to have time to love and to practice love and to love ourselves and other people in a good way, in a proper way, in a way that does good. The paradox is there once again. We seem to be highly interested in loving and being loved. We hardly devote time to be loved properly and to love properly. So, in this alternative way of thinking about love, I've given you lots of ideas. The value of love is not egotistical, it reveals the reality of other people when we love properly, and it offers the possibility of improving the world and improving ourselves as person. Let's go back to the very beginning with that idea of love as something passive, personal, uncontrollable, magical that provides or gives us happiness. This idea, perhaps being so common, might be beneficial to maintain the type of societies that we have, films, songs, poems, and all these cultural elements through which we represent love and that help us know how to feel and how to think about love or what to think about it, maintain this basically self-deception that love is always the cause of our misery or happiness. But what is the benefit in maintaining this idea of love, this common perspective of love? There's a study in Psychologist published recently in 2017 suggesting that we prefer for science to not explain those things that makes us special or that makes us unique and different to other species. Love is one of those things that we believe makes us different to other species. Therefore, a scientific explanation of love is uncomfortable and it's depressing because it's like taking magic away from it. And with that, we are getting rid of whatever makes us special and superior to other species. Let's not forget that this feeling of superiority is what is taking us to disaster and mass destruction of the planet because e- exploiting natural resources for endless um, supply to human beings is an evidence of that. It would be very good to be humble, existentially humble, and seeing we're not that different to other species and the planet is not there for our endless supply. It would be very good to have very many doses of science explaining climate change and many other things, and also a bit of a philosophical push to think about love and feel it as something less passive, less egotistical, and less magic, and appreciate it as something that is very complex, but something that instead of making us happier, it can make us better. Thank you very much, Sarai. That is super interesting and well, a bit disturbing as well. I don't know how we're going to look at our partners tonight when we get home. But anyway, a question for you, summarizing what you said, how easy it is to feel love or how easy it seems to us and how difficult it is to define it. Why do you believe we find it so hard to define or explain what we feel or how we feel? I think that the best answer to that would be to read poetry and read poems. There's such beautiful poetry explaining why it's so difficult to define love, and then simultaneously it's so cool and wonderful and amazing. I believe, as person who studies philosophy, and I do philosophy myself, we should think more. Feeling love is wonderful, but we should reflect more about what is love without having a definition at hand. We don't need a definition to think about how we want to be loved and how we want to love. So I don't have an answer to that. My best response would be poetry on love. That's the best response for me. Thank you very much. We will resort to that, no doubt. And before we say goodbye, let's go back to Clara, because that's the worst nightmare to having technical problems. Clara, maybe you can try to just link and end up with the 1660 playlist, and we would close with Clara. So let's try it out. Clara, can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can. Lovely. Just a second. Let's go back to PowerPoint. And well, I believe we were here in the Peace of the Pyrenees. So I was saying, or I was telling you that this wedding was a wedding of powers, and that the bride and groom were in different separate places, and the only love that we can see here is love between siblings, when the princess, or family love, when she bids farewell to her father, she has to go to a different country and dress as a French woman, and she needs to leave her Spanish princess identity behind. So from this moment on, all the different festivals starts, and we wonder, so what was the music that was played and at what moment? Because we need to understand that temporality was very different in the Baroque, where now we have the minute by minute weddings on the Instagram, but in the 17th century, the temporary dimension of an event was different. This wedding by powers had no relevance in terms of the event, but all the consequences are prolonged for months. And in the case of this wedding, we will see for years. And not only where the wedding is taking place, but also in different parts of Europe, in Spain and France, in different embassies, where the French or Spanish ambassadors are offering and throwing parties. And this is part of the multiple dimension of the celebration. And as I was saying, they get married by powers, but you can see on the painting it's not strictly a lie, because this is ratified in San Juan de Luz, the 9th of June, so tomorrow, in 1660. So there's sacred music here, normally a Te Deum, which is a composition of celebratory nature for these events, not just weddings, but also different kinds of big entity celebrations. But from this moment on, this San Juan de Luz painting, which, by the way, we can see some musicians to the left of the painting. Maybe you can't see them here, but we have some singers here and some hidden musicians. And up until the point when the bride and the groom reach Paris, festivals and parties take place with the musicians that accompany them and the different cities that are receiving them. And also in the other side of the border, as Philip IV reaches Madrid, he finds also parties, but we were talking about opera before. So for this event, of course, both France and Spain have fabulous events that show their power, and that can be unprecedented in the case of Spain. For the first time, the first opera in Spanish is created. It's like an opera or theater, which is fully sung. And this is the title, Celos aún del aire matan, jealousy even of the air kills. This is by Calderón de la Barca, the playwright, and Juan Hidalgo as composer. In Spain, a lot of musical theater had been performed, but not with this concept of being sung from beginning to end. But then at the same time, it maintains this Hispanic tradition of comedies with comedians, even though tragic, even though the plot is tragic, but we see the fool constantly, funny characters, and the characters, even if they're male or female, it's women who sing for all of them, and they carry the weight of the performance. This was something typical in Hispanic theater, but not at all typical in other types of theaters. This is based on the myth of Cephalus and Procris, and it's basically a warning to the wife on jealousy. It's basically telling her that the it is very likely that her um, husband won't be faithful, but she needs to accept that and continue moving forward. It's not a message that you would give to someone getting married now, but it is, or it was a message back then. So a lot of scenic development in the Colosseum of the Buen Retiro in Madrid. So what happens in France, as I was saying, this will of having a huge event means that not only they're going to premiere an opera, but also an entire theater. So the theater that Duyery was open for that, which was an disproportionate play or place because it had 7,000 places. The main theater in Madrid has 2,000, so this is totally disproportionate. But with these colossal work, of course, it is not finished on time. So the opera has its premiere in 1662. This is Ercole Amante with music by the Venetian musician Cavalli. And despite him being Italian, as happens with the case of Spain, he also has this brand of the country. It has French style ballet, and the opera actually, the entire performance of the opera is 7 hours, and both kings intervene in this ballet, and all sorts of noblemen and noblewomen of the French royal court. And Hercule is in love, and this is another message. A man such as Hercule can be strong, can conquer lands and nations, but needs to be careful of falling too much in love or falling in love with the wrong person. So maybe I have taken too much time. We could talk about this for very long, actually, for this music, which is actually very complex and different and holds great value. But I just want to close reminding you of the importance of these events, that we do remember them politically speaking, but we don't think about these cultural repercussions they have, and that last during the entire century, that actually tell a lot about history of music. So thank you very much. Thank you, Clara. We'll close with a quick question for you as well, because knowing this history of the Baroque and given the current musical history where there's love everywhere, I don't know whether, how do you see in common between the different centuries? Do you see any similarities or differences that you would like to talk about? Well, I think that in this concept, as was saying before, this romantic love, sometimes we have these ideas that are associated to love and that they are disturbing. This agreed marriages is something that starts to be part of history, but what I would recover is the Baroque idea of having this great party and having it written in all chronicles, the entire Europe celebrating. It reminds me of this day-to-day society in which we are looking for something spectacular, but then at the same time, we want for it to get conveyed and communicated. It's not only about living the moment, but it's about the dissemination of the moment as much as possible. And that very visual dimension. I don't know if I'm answering the question more or less. I think you are. So thank you very much. And congratulations, Clara, for being back and finishing your presentation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Laia, Clara, Sarai, Merce. Thank you, Enrique. I can't forget about you, Enrique. And thank you, Alfonso. and La Caixa Foundation for organizing this session and inviting me to be here with you. Thank you very much to everyone following us from Spain and from abroad. I hope that you had a good time with us here today. It's been very interesting. And let's continue talking about love from all these different perspectives. And let's continue thinking about how we want to love and be loved.